says, look, we basically exist in three different phases of medicine, one of which we're, I think, not quite into yet, but we're in the transition. So these transitions are far from discrete, and they take, in some cases, I think the transition from medicine 1.0 to 2.0 took, I don't know, I would argue from the beginning to the end, 300 years. Okay, so what are they? So medicine 1.0 is when we had no idea of science. We have to kind of keep in mind, science is what? You know, it's such a political term at the moment that's really unfortunate, but science is a way of thinking, right? Science is not a person. Science is not an answer. Science is a process. It's a way that we look at the natural world around us. We formulate hypotheses about what explains them based on the physical principles of the universe. We design experiments to test those hypotheses, and we measure the results of those experiments against the predictions of the hypotheses, and then we iterate and correct. And this was really, so it's important to understand, like, that we're not naturally wired to do that, one. So evolution didn't prepare us to do that. It had no interest in us doing that. I've written at length about this. I think I wrote a blog post on this 7 or 8 years ago called Why We're Not Wired to Think Scientifically. I think we should link to that because I go into much more detail about the time scale of evolution and the process of our thinking. So prior to the invention of this idea, nothing that existed in medicine could be tethered to science. So anytime something happened, you had to come up with an explanation. That's why we, have these wonderful brains that we do. We use them to come up with explanations for things that we see happening, but none of it could be linked to scientific fact or verifiable or testable hypotheses. So this is where you had sort of all sorts of crazy ideas. If you were sick, it was due to bad humors, and it was bad spirits and bad luck and all these sorts of things. But there was no sort of scientific basis for that. So that kind of started to change in the late 17th century with Francis Bacon. But I would argue that the full transition to medicine 2.0 didn't actually take place until the advent of germ theory in the late 19th century. So that's about 300 years if I'm doing the math right. 16. No. I'm sorry. It's about 200 years. Okay. So we've got about this 200-year period where, Joseph Lister, all the way up to Fleming and the discovery of penicillin and antibiotics, that to me is the breakthrough of medicine 2.0. So medicine 2.0 comes from basically three things. One is the advent and acceptance of germ theory, the development of the process of scientific thinking, and then really the crown jewel of medicine 2.0, which doesn't come along until much later, is the statistical machinery to enable randomized control trials. So again, because we're trying to be a little bit quick, I won't go into all the details and Bernard Fisher and all of these people who played such an important role in this, but that's basically the trifecta of medicine 2.0. And to be clear, medicine 2.0 has been an amazing development, right? Like, I don't think any of us would be sitting here today without medicine 2.0. So I don't want to minimize it, but I want to acknowledge and just pass on, and the book talks more about this, so we don't have to get into the great detail. Medicine 2.0 has really peaked, right? So it's been very good at dealing with acute conditions. You get hit by a car, you have a life-threatening infection, you suffer an MI, a myocardial infarction, and you want to make sure someone doesn't die, and you want to keep somebody alive as long as possible in that, acute phase. Medicine 2.0 is amazing for those things. What I argue is that we have reached the limits of medicine 2.0's capacity. And if longevity is something we are aspiring for, we need a new strategy. We need as fundamental a shift as 2.0 was from 1.0, and that is to 3.0. And 3.0 is basically predicated on evidence-informed as opposed to evidence-based guidelines. It is predicated on absurdly early preventative measures for chronic conditions, which are now the dominant source of morbidity and mortality. It's no longer acute conditions. And it has to be highly personalized. So I'll stop there because, again, I could probably spend the hour now talking about that, but I think people now get the sense of what this is. And I'm arguing that we're not, of course, yet in Medicine 3.0, but we're now in that transition. And what I'm arguing is we should be accelerating that.